The phone rang at 3:33 a.m., as it had every night for 12 years. A piercing cry in the silence that tore Ethan Caldwell from sleep. His heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of a mystery that had haunted his family since he was a teenager. Tonight, he swore, would be the night he'd finally uncover who was calling, and why. Ethan, now 28, lay in his childhood bedroom in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, the same small town where he'd grown up under the shadow of his father's rigid expectations. The room was a time capsule. Faded baseball posters, a cracked model airplane, and the faint scent of pine from the forest outside. He'd moved back home 3 months ago after his father, Robert Caldwell, suffered a stroke, leaving the stoic widower frail and uncharacteristically quiet. Ethan's mother had passed when he was 10, and Robert had raised him alone, a man of few words but ironclad rules. The nightly calls, always silent, always at 3:33 a.m., had been their family's unspoken curse, a secret Robert refused to address. Ethan reached for the phone on the nightstand, its glow casting harsh shadows across his face. He pressed it to his ear, hearing nothing but faint static and the ghost of a breath. "Who are you?" he whispered, voice trembling with years of pent-up frustration. No answer, as always. He hung up, his chest tight. The calls had started when he was 16, the same year he'd come out to his father as gay. That conversation had been a disaster. Robert's face had hardened, his voice cold as he said, "This isn't who you are, Ethan. Fix it." They'd barely spoken of it since, their relationship a fragile truce of avoidance and duty. But Ethan wasn't the scared kid anymore. He'd built a life in Philadelphia, working as a graphic designer, finding love with Noah, a kind-hearted barista with a laugh that could melt winter. Noah had urged him to come home, to face his father and the past. "You can't heal if you keep running," Noah had said, his hazel eyes steady. So here Ethan was, back in Willow Creek, sleeping in a room that felt too small for the man he'd become, chasing a truth that felt just out of reach. The next morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, watching his father sip coffee with trembling hands. Robert, once a towering figure who coached Little League and fixed cars in the garage, now looked like a shadow of himself. His white hair was thinning, his blue eyes cloudy. Ethan wanted to ask about the calls, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said, "I'm going into town today. Need anything?" Robert grunted, barely looking up. "Just don't stir up trouble." Ethan drove his old pickup to the local library, a squat brick building where he'd spent hours as a kid, escaping his father's disapproval. He was searching for clues, anything about the number that called every night. The phone company had been useless, citing privacy laws, and the number was untraceable, a ghost in the system. At the library, he dug through Old Town records, phone books, anything that might connect to 3:33 a.m. hours past, and he found nothing but dead ends. Frustrated, he stepped outside for air and saw Noah's car pulling into the lot. Noah had driven up from Philly for the weekend, his presence a lifeline. "Any luck?" Noah asked, leaning against the truck, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "Nothing," Ethan admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's like chasing a shadow." Noah pulled him into a hug, warm and grounding. "You'll figure it out. You always do." That night, the call came again. Ethan stared at the phone, his pulse racing. This time, he didn't pick up. Instead, he grabbed his laptop and ran a reverse search on the number for the 100th time. The screen flickered, then displayed a name, James Whitaker. Ethan's breath caught. Whitaker was a name he hadn't heard in years, a man his father had worked with at the steel mill, a friend who'd vanished from their lives when Ethan was a kid. He scoured the internet for James Whitaker, finding an obituary from 2005. James had died in a car accident, leaving behind a wife and daughter. Ethan's mind spun. Why would a dead man's number call every night? He dug deeper, finding an old photo from the mill's newsletter. His father and James, both young, laughing together, arms slung around each other's shoulders. The closeness in their posture, the ease in their smiles, it felt intimate, almost too familiar. Ethan's stomach twisted. He thought of his father's late-night pacing, the locked drawer in his study, the way Robert's face tightened whenever Ethan mentioned his own relationships. Could the calls be connected to James? To a secret his father had buried? The next day, Ethan confronted Robert in the living room, holding the photo. "Who was James Whittaker to you, Dad?" he asked, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Robert's face paled, his coffee mug slipping from his grip and shattering on the floor. "Don't," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "Don't dig into this, Ethan." But Ethan couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth felt so close. Ethan stood in the living room, the broken mug at his father's feet, a jagged symbol of the fracture between them. Robert's eyes, usually so guarded, flickered with something raw, fear, maybe, or shame. Ethan held the photo tighter, the image of his father and James Whittaker burning into his mind. "Why won't you talk about him?" Ethan pressed, his voice low but firm. "James Whittaker. The calls come from his number, Dad. Every night. For 12 years. Robert's jaw clenched, and he turned away, gripping the arm of his recliner. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "Leave it alone." But Ethan couldn't. The calls, the secrecy, the way his father had shut him out since he came out. It all pointed to something bigger, something Robert was desperate to hide. Ethan left the room, his heart pounding, and headed to the study. The locked drawer in his father's desk had always been off-limits, a forbidden corner of their home. Now it felt like the key to everything. He waited until Robert was asleep, the house heavy with silence, and crept downstairs. The drawer was old, its lock rusted, and after a few tense minutes with a paperclip, it gave way. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed and creased, addressed to Robert in a neat, slanted script. Ethan's hands shook as he opened one, dated 1985. "Rob, I know we said we'd stop, but I can't. Not yet. Meet me at the lake. 3:33 a.m. It's always been our time. G." Ethan's breath hitched. The lake. The time. It wasn't just a coincidence. He read another, then another, each one more desperate, more intimate. "I love you, Rob, but we're killing ourselves hiding like this. If we could just be honest, maybe we'd be free." The words painted a picture of a love that had been fierce, forbidden, and ultimately broken. Ethan sank to the floor, the letters scattered around him. His father, gruff, unyielding Robert Caldwell, had loved a man, James Whittaker. The realization hit like a tidal wave, reshaping every memory of his father's coldness, his distance, his refusal to accept Ethan's truth. Was it guilt, fear, or something deeper? The next morning, Noah arrived, his presence a steady anchor in Ethan's storm. They sat on the porch, the autumn air crisp, and Ethan showed him the letters. Noah read in silence, his brow furrowed. "This changes everything," he said finally, his voice soft. "Your dad, he wasn't just rejecting you. He was rejecting himself." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I need to find out what happened to James. Why the calls keep coming." They drove to the home of James's widow, Margaret Whittaker, who lived on the edge of town in a modest ranch house. Margaret, a white woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair, welcomed them with tea and a wary smile. "You're Robert's boy," she said, studying Ethan. "You look just like him." Ethan hesitated, then showed her the obituary and the photo. "I found this. I think my dad and James were close. Can you tell me about him?" Margaret's face softened, then hardened. "James was a good man, loved his family, his work, but he carried a weight, something he never fully shared. He and your father were friends, best friends, I thought, until James started staying out late, coming home different. Then he died, and I never understood why." Ethan swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think they were in love." Margaret froze, her teacup trembling. After a long silence, she nodded. "I suspected. But James never admitted it. And after he died, your father stopped coming around. It broke something in him, I think. That night, the call came again at 3:33 a.m. Ethan answered, his voice steady. James, if it's you, I know now. I know about you and Dad. The line went dead, but for the first time, Ethan felt a shift like a weight lifting. He confronted Robert the next day, letters in hand. You loved him, Ethan said, his voice breaking. You loved James, and you've been hiding it my whole life. Robert's face crumpled, and for the first time, Ethan saw his father cry. I couldn't save him, Robert whispered, and I couldn't save myself. Robert's confession hung in the air, heavy and fragile, like a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a shelf. Ethan stood frozen, the letters clutched in his hands, their words now seared into his memory. His father's tears were a shock, a crack in the facade of the man who'd always seemed unbreakable. Tell me what happened, Ethan said, his voice soft but unyielding. I deserve to know. Robert sank into his recliner, his hands trembling. James and I, we were young, stupid, in love, but too scared to admit it to anyone. Willow Creek wasn't a place for men like us, not in the 80s. We'd meet at the lake at 3:33 a.m. when the world was asleep. It was our secret, our only freedom. Ethan listened, his heart aching. He pictured his father, younger than he was now, sneaking through the dark to meet James, stealing moments of joy in a world that would have condemned them. What happened to him? Ethan asked. Robert's voice broke. We fought. I wanted to stop, to be normal. I was getting married to your mom, trying to do what was expected. James didn't want to hide anymore. He was braver than me. That night he drove off angry. The accident, it was my fault. I should have stopped him. Ethan's chest tightened. The obituary had said James's car veered off the road into a ravine. No foul play, just a tragedy. But now it felt like more, like a wound that had never healed. And the calls? Ethan asked. They started when I came out. Why? Robert looked away, his voice barely audible. I don't know. I thought it was my guilt, my mind playing tricks. But every night, 3:33, it's like he's still there, reminding me of what I lost, what I cost us both. Ethan wanted to be angry, to scream at his father for the years of silence, for the rejection that had shaped his own pain. But all he felt was grief, for James, for his father, for the love they'd been forced to bury. He reached out, touching Robert's shoulder. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. That evening, Ethan and Noah drove to the lake, a quiet stretch of water framed by pines, where Robert and James had once found solace. Noah held Ethan's hand as they sat on the shore, the water reflecting the fading light. What now? Noah asked. I need to help him heal, Ethan said, and maybe myself too. They returned home to find Robert in the study, staring at an old photo of James. Ethan sat beside him, and for the first time, they talked. Not as father and son at odds, but as two men who'd both loved and lost. Robert spoke of James's laugh, his stubborn streak, the way he'd hum off-key to Springsteen songs. Ethan shared stories of Noah, of finding acceptance in a world that had changed, however slowly. The next day, Ethan tracked down James's daughter, Emily, now a teacher in Pittsburgh. She was in her 30s, with her father's sharp cheekbones and a guarded warmth. Over coffee, Ethan explained everything, the letters, the calls, the love her father and his had shared. Emily listened, her eyes glistening. I wish I'd known, she said. He deserved to be remembered for who he really was. Together, they planned a small memorial at the lake, a way to honor James and give Robert closure. Ethan invited Robert, who hesitated but agreed, his steps unsteady as they approached the water. The memorial was simple. A stone marker with James's name, a few words from Emily, and a moment of silence as the sun set. That night, the phone didn't ring. For the first time in 12 years, 3:33 a.m. passed in silence. Ethan lay awake, waiting, but the quiet felt like a gift, a sign that James's ghost, or Robert's guilt, had finally found peace. The silence at 3:33 a.m. was deafening, a void where the phone's ring had once defined Ethan's nights. He sat up in bed, staring at the phone, half expecting it to shatter the quiet. But it didn't, and in that stillness, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and loss, like a chapter had closed, but the story wasn't finished. Robert was different after the memorial. He moved slower, spoke softer, as if unburdening himself had left him lighter but fragile. Ethan watched him closely, noticing the way his father lingered over old photos, the way he'd pause at the mention of James's name. It was progress, but it wasn't healing, not yet. Ethan and Noah decided to stay in Willow Creek a while longer, renting a small apartment downtown to give Robert space but stay close. Noah took a leave from his job, his support unwavering. "We're in this together," he told Ethan one evening, as they cooked dinner in their cramped kitchen, the smell of garlic and tomatoes filling the air. Ethan kissed him, grateful for the man who'd become his home. But the mystery of the calls lingered. The phone company had confirmed the number was disconnected, tied to James's old line, yet the calls had persisted for years. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. He visited the library again, this time digging into local history, searching for anything that might explain the anomaly. He found a reference to an old payphone near the lake, installed in the 80s and decommissioned after James's death. The number matched. Ethan drove to the lake, Noah beside him, and found the payphone's remnants, a rusted metal frame hidden in the overgrowth. It was impossible, but Ethan dialed the number from his cell, his heart pounding. Static crackled, then a faint voice. "Rob!" It was distant, garbled, but unmistakably human. Ethan dropped the phone, his hands shaking. "That was him," he whispered. Noah grabbed his arm, steadying him. "It's not possible," Noah said, but his voice wavered. They returned to Robert, who listened to Ethan's story with a haunted look. "I used to call that payphone," Robert admitted. "After he died, I'd call it, hoping somehow he'd answer. I stopped years ago, but maybe I never let go." Ethan's mind raced. Was it a glitch, a ghost, or something else? He contacted a tech friend in Philly, who traced the number to an old server in a defunct telecom office, looping a signal that somehow kept James's number active. It wasn't supernatural, but it felt like a message, a reminder of love that refused to be forgotten. Ethan and Robert began rebuilding their relationship, piece by piece. They talked about James, about Ethan's life, about the years of silence. Robert admitted he'd pushed Ethan away to protect himself from his own pain, his own shame. "I was wrong," he said one night, his voice thick. "You're my son, and I should have loved you better." Ethan forgave him, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. He saw his father not as the unyielding man he'd feared, but as someone who'd been broken by a world that hadn't allowed him to love freely. Noah and Ethan took Robert to a pride event in Pittsburgh, a small step toward bridging their worlds. Robert was quiet, overwhelmed by the colors and the joy, but he held Ethan's hand, a gesture that said more than words ever could. As weeks passed, Ethan felt the weight of the past lifting. He and Noah planned to return to Philly, but not before making sure Robert was okay. They helped him join a support group for older LGBTQ+ folks, a place where he could share his story and find community. The lake became a place of pilgrimage for them, a spot to honor James and the love that had shaped their family, even in its absence. Ethan felt closer to his father than ever, their bond forged not just by blood, but by the courage to face the truth. Spring arrived in Willow Creek, painting the town in soft greens and pinks, a quiet promise of renewal. Ethan and Noah stood at the lake, the stone marker for James Whitaker gleaming in the morning light. Robert was there too, his cane steady against the earth, his face softer than Ethan had ever seen it. They'd come to scatter wildflower seeds, a final tribute to a man whose love had changed them all. Ethan looked at his father, now 70, and saw not just the man who'd raised him, but the man who'd loved and lost, who'd carried a secret for decades. The calls had stopped, the old payphone's signal finally disconnected, but their echo lingered in Ethan's heart, a reminder that love, even when hidden, leaves a mark. Back in Philadelphia, Ethan and Noah settled into their life, their apartment filled with light and laughter. Ethan took on new design projects, pouring his emotions into his work, while Noah opened a small coffee shop, its walls lined with photos of their journey. Willow Creek, the lake, Robert smiling at pride. They were building something together, something lasting. Robert visited often, his health improving with his newfound openness. He'd started writing letters again, not to James, but to Ethan, sharing stories of his youth, his fears, his hopes. Each letter was a bridge, mending years of distance. One evening, over dinner, Robert handed Ethan a small box. Inside was a watch, its face etched with 333. "It was James's," Robert said. "He'd want you to have it." Ethan wore it every day, a tangible link to a man he'd never known but whose love had shaped his father's life and his own. He thought about the calls, the mystery that had brought him back to Willow Creek, and realized they'd been more than a glitch or a ghost. They'd been a call to truth, to healing, to love. The story of Robert and James spread quietly in Willow Creek, a town that had once forced them into shadows. Emily Whitaker organized a community event at the lake, a celebration of love in all its forms, and Ethan spoke, his voice steady as he shared his father's story. The crowd, a mix of old and young, listened in silence, some with tears in their eyes. It wasn't acceptance from everyone, but it was a start. Ethan and Noah got engaged that summer, their proposal a quiet moment at the lake, under the same stars where Robert and James had once stolen kisses. Robert was there for the wedding, walking Ethan down the aisle, his smile brighter than the sun. The ceremony was small, intimate, filled with the people who'd become their family. Emily, Margaret, friends from Philly, and members of Robert's support group. As Ethan and Noah danced, Robert watched, his eyes glistening. Later, he pulled Ethan aside. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." Ethan hugged him, feeling the weight of years fall away. "We're here now," he said. "That's what matters." The lake remained a touchstone, a place Ethan and Noah returned to each year, sometimes with Robert, sometimes alone. They'd sit by the marker, watching the wildflowers bloom, and talk about the future, about love, about family, about the world they were helping to change. The calls had stopped, but their legacy lived on. They'd led Ethan to his father's truth, to a love that had been hidden but never lost. And in that truth, Ethan found his own strength, his own voice, and a family bound not by secrets, but by the courage to live openly, fiercely, and fully.